Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has challenged his opponent Liberal Mark Carney to face off at the upcoming French TVA debate, even offering to pay Carney's $75,000 entry fee himself.
Former Immigration Minister Sean Fraser has decided to run for re-election after announcing his political retirement last December.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith criticized Liberal leader Mark Carney for doing little to advance Alberta's economic interests. Hello Canada, it's Wednesday, March 26th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Alex Zoltan.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has thrown down the gauntlet at Liberal leader Mark Carney, daring him to step onto the stage for a French-language TVA debate, a showdown the Liberals have been avoiding. Poilievre even offered to cover the $75,000 entry fee required for Carney to participate in the April 1st debate.
I want to challenge Mark Carney to show up for the debate at TVA in Quebec. He's running away and hiding because he believes that he's too weak to defend the lost Liberal decade or explain why he thinks Liberals deserve a fourth term. Let's have a debate in French where we put together the choice. Either a fourth Liberal term after costs and crime have gone up and our economy has gone down under the American thumb, or putting Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will build the homes. I'll even pay Mr. Carney's fee so that he can show up. We'll take that excuse away from him. Conservatives will even pay the fee to bring him out if he's not afraid. And by the way, if he is afraid to have the debate, how is he going to have the courage to stand up against Donald Trump? It's going to take someone who's strong enough to do that. And if he's not afraid, then he'll show up at that debate. I'm not afraid, and I'm ready to enjoy that debate with him.
Carney had previously confirmed that he would attend when asked by a Radio Canada reporter on Monday. However, Carney's campaign later announced he would not be participating in the TVA debate the following day. The party has alluded to the $75,000 fee as being the reason, a requirement that Poilievre is looking to cover. Group TVA had requested a $75,000 participation fee from each of the parties to help with production costs for the event. The media company recently laid off around 500 employees and says it would have to hire freelancers to produce the program, as it won't be taking advertising revenue from the broadcast. Poilievre said that if Carney's impetus for opting out is not rooted in the fee but fear, it speaks to a larger issue of how his leadership would stand up against U.S. President Donald Trump. So, Alex, this is your first time on the podcast, and I just wanted to say welcome from myself and our listeners. And with regards to Carney's refusal to participate in the TVA debate, is Carney's lack of French fluency catching up to him? Has he proven himself as an effective French speaker to Canadians?
Well, thank you for having me. I think that the question of whether or not his French fluency is catching up to him would be less relevant and important if they hadn't disqualified Liberal leadership candidate Chandra Arya on account of his lack of French fluency. So I think that that's an interesting element to the story, especially given the fact that they have also disqualified him from being the candidate in the Nepean riding, where Mark Carney is going to be running for member of parliament as the Liberal leader. Well, they disqualified him in the leadership race, and then they've disqualified him from even running for re-election as member of parliament in the Nepean riding. Although I imagine that the decision to disqualify him from running as a member of parliament has less to do with his French than it did in the leadership race.
Yeah, Alex, and there's other slip-ups Canadians have been pointing to where Carney has shown he's not exactly fluent in French or he misunderstands questions. During the Liberal leadership debate, he was asked about Hamas, and he accidentally said in the French language that he agrees with Hamas rather than he agrees on the topic of Hamas. So there's constant mess-ups, and when he's questioned in French, recent press conferences, his responses don't really seem natural. They seem like he has go-to responses, and they come across as a bit forced or misunderstanding the questions posed to him. And reporters have even had to repeat themselves. During the Liberal leadership debate again, a reporter had to repeat the French phrase for 20 seconds multiple times before telling Carney that he has 20 seconds in English during the French debate.
The former Liberal immigration minister responsible for accepting the most immigrants in Canadian history will be running for re-election, reversing an earlier decision he made to retire from politics. Liberal incumbent Sean Fraser will run for re-election in Central Nova after previously backing out of politics in December of 2024. Canadians know Fraser as the immigration minister responsible for letting an unprecedented amount of immigrants into Canada and setting the controversial 500,000 a year target for the Trudeau Liberals. Fraser was the Liberals' immigration minister between 2021 and 2023. By 2023, 2.2 million immigrants, including those holding temporary visas, were entering Canada annually. While being in charge of Canada's immigration system, Fraser set historical records for how many permanent and temporary immigrants Canada accepted in just 1 year. In 2021, Fraser celebrated granting 401,000 new permanent residencies. Fraser said, quote, "This is a historic moment for our country, as we welcome in the highest number of newcomers in 1 year in our history." Fraser then outdid himself in 2022 with 431,000 and 2023 with 472,000, surpassing historical immigration records yet again for permanent residencies. He was then shuffled off by the Liberals into the role of Canada's housing minister, where he denied that immigration was a contributing factor to the housing crisis and that the record levels would actually solve housing shortages. By 2023, Canada was taking in 5 times more immigrants than housing starts. Carney has promised to lower Canada's immigration levels and maintain the current cuts. Can Canadians expect him to follow through on his pledge?
Well, the nature of election promises is that governments, when they're elected, they don't necessarily follow through on everything. There are many indications Mark Carney is shifting towards more conservative talking points, but then he does other things that might indicate otherwise. I think the key example here being before he called the election, he appointed Mark Wiseman, who is the co-founder of the Century Initiative, which is essentially a mass immigration lobbying group that wants to see Canada's population reach 100 million people by the end of the century. And to do that, they want to push pro-immigration policies and have done so under the prior Trudeau government. So with the running of Fraser again, he's running again under the Carney Liberals this time, and his role as Trudeau's former immigration minister, there's indication that while Carney seems to be saying that he wants to keep the current cuts in place and perhaps even lower the number of immigrants coming to Canada, the people he surrounds himself with says otherwise.
I also think it's interesting that Sean Fraser resigned in December, thereby forcing Nathaniel Erskine-Smith to step in as housing minister. And now with the calling of an election, he will only have had 4 months of oversight over this portfolio, which might speak to a lack of seriousness or forethought in terms of the way that the cabinet has been managed by the Trudeau-Carney Liberals.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said Liberal leader Mark Carney had little to provide Canada's most economically prosperous province beyond empty promises. Carney is under fire for delivering contradictory messages depending on the audience. This time, Carney is being called out for conflicting positions on oil and gas emissions caps. Premier Smith called out Carney's inconsistency, noting that while he opposed an oil and gas production cap in Edmonton last Thursday, he expressed support for it in Ottawa the very next day. Smith said, quote, "The more things change, the more they stay the same. The Liberals clearly have not learned their lesson and have no plan to make our country into the independent economic powerhouse it could be." Smith revealed on Friday that despite Carney's in-person assurances the day before, his environment minister before the election was called, Terry DeGuide, told the media that the Liberals' emissions cap would remain in place. Carney called the election just days after his flip-flop, setting the vote for April 28th, the shortest campaign period allowed by law. This isn't the first time Carney has faced criticism for sending contradictory messages. Previously, Carney came under fire for telling English and French-speaking audiences conflicting stories about the future of pipelines in Canada. Alex, if I recall correctly, there's been some recent studies that look into the impact of the oil and gas cap. How much would the oil and gas cap harm Canada and Alberta economically?
I think it would be a tremendous harm to Canada, given how important our energy sector is to the economy, not only of Alberta, but to the country of Canada. I also think that Carney has kind of spoken out of both sides of his mouth on this issue, because he says that he would like to fast track energy projects, including a potential coast-to-coast pipeline. However, he is also handpicking candidates for his campaign in the upcoming federal election, like former Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson, who have taken very radical anti-pipeline positions in the past. So I don't know how he intends to square that circle. By 2050, the Conference Board of Canada report highlights that Alberta's GDP will shrink by 11%, employment will decrease by 4%, and the average Albertan will have $3,300 less in disposable income. By 2030, the same report suggests that Alberta will experience a deep recession due to the plan. Nationally, real GDP will fall by 3.8% due to the emissions cap by 2050. Canadian oil and gas production would drop by 37% by 2050. And nationwide, unemployment is expected to increase by 2.6%, and consumer prices are expected to increase as well by 2.5%.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating, and please leave a review.